The CIA in 1951 is telling the Ford Foundation, hey, put a shit ton of money into big universities and their area studies programs. The establishment of area institutes, area studies. So Russian studies, Middle East studies, Latin American studies, African studies, East Asian studies. Now get this. It is impossible to design intelligent programs of economic assistance, political reorientation, or psychological warfare. The whole point of this is to get the CIA, the Director of Central Intelligence, to convince private foundations to give more money to big universities so that the CIA can use that information for, I'm sorry, can I zoom anymore? Psychological warfare. Okay. So we've been talking about Harvard, and we talked a lot about Columbia University. And I want to show you guys a couple things I found declassified. This is from 1951. It was declassified in 1999. And it's called Foundation for Support for Research in the Fields of the Behavioral Sciences, Communications, and Industrial Organization. It's an analyst memo at the Central Intelligence Agency about foundation support for research. We covered this at length in our CIA and the university streams. From the National Endowment for Democracy, that's the U.S. government, the Cold War's organization, man, how Philip Mosley, the Columbia University godfather of the field of Soviet studies, Sovietology at the university level. And it starts, if you remember, by saying the young Central Intelligence Agency in 1946 only had 38 Soviet analysts, only 12 of whom spoke any Russian. How could American officials chart a foreign policy for the Cold War without knowing what the heck was going on? So the CIA resolved that it would merge intelligence with big university to have area studies programs in areas of interest. So instead of having 38 Soviet analysts, you have 38,000, because every major university has a Soviet studies department. And those professors and institute directors and directors of centers will simply give their intelligence on what they're studying about Russia to the CIA. And this really hit the gas with Columbia University's Soviet Studies Department. Philip Mosley, folks are new here, I'll post the link. Thanks to the institutions around Soviet studies went from a scholarly backwater to intellectual juggernaut in a matter of years, sitting at the intersection of scholarship, intelligence, and philanthropy. So, big university area studies programs, the Central Intelligence Agency, and the large foundations, which at the time were the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Carnegie Foundation. Today that's going to include the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Open Society Foundation. But I bring this up because, again, the name of this CIA memo is Foundation Support for Research. And as we'll see, it is all about the CIA encouraging private foundations, the big private foundations, to give more money to universities so that the universities can produce work product for the CIA. But again, sitting at the intersection of big universities, CIA, and the foundations, the Secretary of State said there was no line between government and academic work. The Secretary of State from 1969 to 1973, succeeded by Henry Kissinger. So by the late 60s, early 70s, there was literally no line between government and academic work. That's how penetrated big university was by big diplomacy. That's where the money comes from. That's why, as I mentioned, $9 billion to Harvard in government grants. There's no line. They are just topping up the capacity because the CIA can't afford to do it all on their own. So they just build up a giant web. They capacity build a giant web of assets in big universities. You'll see Mosley himself, before he went into big universities and created a lot of this architecture, served in a dizzying succession of State Department posts related to wartime diplomacy. He accompanied the Secretary of State conferences in Paris, Moscow, Potsdam. He participated in 2 Rockefeller Foundation conferences. One of the largest contributors to the Atlantic Council, the Rockefeller Foundation. Knew everyone in that network, was active in all 3 spheres simultaneously, working at the State Department, publishing, and consulting for the private foundations. And then he took up the Russian Institute at Columbia University. And what you see is this whole thing is a CIA story. They were getting CIA subsidies to produce this Russian work. The CIA's proposed Eurasian Institute, CIA. Mosley held, as a Columbia University academic, top secret security clearances at 9 government agencies, including the NSC, the CIA, the State Department, Naval Intelligence, yada, 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 yada. Okay? But since we're an NGO world and all of that flows through foundations like the Open Society Foundation and the Gates Foundation, I'm going to read some of these CIA declassified documents. Okay, 1951. Certain basic difficulties are inherent in the search for information on foundation support of research activities in the fields of behavioral sciences, communications, and industrial organization. At present, 3,500 to 4,000 foundations exist in the U.S. This is the CIA talking in 1951. Here's the link. Of the 4,000 foundations in the U.S., approximately 60 are sufficiently well-funded to engage in or to sponsor broad programs of research. So the CIA says, okay, we need to build up this giant web within the universities. And they're going to be an addendum to our research and analysis arm at CIA. But there's only 60 foundations in the United States who are capable of funding this at the level we need. Of this 60, only a few support research falling in the indicated CIA fields of interest. Moreover, it has not been possible to delineate specific fields of activity from broad statements of purpose, since only a few of the major foundations have issued detailed reports. Fellowships granted to individuals, grants in aid to existing research groups, or establishment of the foundation's own research activity. That's how they do it. Most of the research identified in this CIA survey fall into category 2, grants to existing groups. And you'll see they even reference, like the American Council of Learned Societies, which I believe, as you'll see, Philip Mosley, the CIA's man for spawning so much of this infrastructure, was a part of the American Council on Learned Societies, which, as you'll see, is right here doing the stuff that the CIA wants them to do. So the CIA produces this list of universities that are getting grants from private foundations to do the work that the CIA wants done. This is in the 1950s, guys. For example, the University of Chicago has a Center for Advanced Study in Behavioral Sciences. Whatever that means. I mean, of course, MKUltra was going on at this time. They're doing all this social science research so that they can use it for operational planning. And they note that the Ford Foundation has given them almost $4 million. It's a lot of money in the 1950s, $4 million. Doing CIA research here. Princeton, funded by the Ford Foundation for that. Michigan, Columbia University, inventory of knowledge on political behavior. So the CIA wants this work done. These universities are doing it, and these foundations are funding it. So this is intelligence, universities, and private foundations. University of Chicago, University of Princeton, University of Michigan, University of Columbia, Cornell University, Duke University, parapsychology. Why does the CIA want parapsychology work done, huh? Stanford, MIT, University of Minnesota, Rutgers, Yale University. Of course, at Yale, they're studying attitude change. Why does the CIA want Yale studying attitude change? Oh, do you remember last stream where we went over Yale's attitude change about vaccine uptake? Which emotion works best to produce attitude change about vaccines? Anger, fear, embarrassment, guilt. They were hitting them as safe and effective months before a vaccine was even developed. It goes back to the 1950s, the CIA and Yale were doing that together. Harvard University. Contemporary Russian language. Funded by the Rockefeller Institute, Rockefeller Foundation. CIA's work on Eurasia being done at Harvard University. And if you guys have seen all my Harvard stuff this week that I've been doing in the media, it's all about Harvard being at odds with the Trump administration over Eurasia policy, over Russia policy. And as I mentioned, the fucking head of the Harvard Corporation, Penny Pritzker, the Pritzker family is what spawned the Obama political career out of Chicago in the 2000s. Penny Pritzker was the U.S. Special Representative for Ukraine economic recovery. So it's all about how to get more money to Ukraine, While Ukraine, U.S. corporations cash in on Ukraine's oil and gas, Ukraine accelerates privatization. Out of the Kiev Post, funded by USAID. Remember what I said, the whole thing, the Harvard endowment takes advantage of State Department imposed privatization of publicly held assets and gets to gobble them up on the cheap as they're auctioned off to Harvard University. Ukraine plans to sell at least 10 large state-owned companies for $3 billion. How many of those do you think the Harvard endowment is investing in? I would wager a lot. Since the Harvard Corporation is ran by Penny Pritzker, as they are using all of Harvard's assets to promote Ukraine and try to kill Russians. Try to take that land. The Harvard Corporation, which is the head of it, that senior position. So she's simultaneously head of Harvard and head of Ukraine reconstruction, meaning private companies investing in it. Isn't that amazing? But you'll see Harvard was doing Russia ops for the CIA back in the 1950s. So for about 70 years, the Harvard has been tied with CIA work in Ukraine and Russia. Carnegie, Cornell, I mean, this is like 24 different universities in the 1950s alone that the CIA is concerned with getting them funded. Okay, and then they've got a bunch of these committees that they want funded. The CIA wants them funded. Everywhere. I mean, you look at these areas, Southern Asia, of course, Vietnam War, Slavic studies, Central and Eastern Europe during the Cold War. I love this one. The CIA wants musicology out of my nightmares in the 1950s, man. The CIA is trying to get financing to fund the musicology departments in universities. This is the CIA in 1951 wanting, look, this is called Foundation Support for Research. How do we get more money? And you'll see that in the next memo, there's even more of this. How do we get more money into these universities? And they're going after the music field in the 1950s, man. Oh, yeah, Joint Committee of Slavic Studies, look at this. Chaired by Abram Bergson of Columbia, the conference included participants from State, Commerce, Rand Corporation, CIA. Don't you love this? The Social Science Research Council. Social Science Research Council. Attendees include the State Department, the Commerce Department, the Central Intelligence Agency, and the Rand Corporation. Can't spell academia without CIA. But this, I just love this, the musicology thing just drives me crazy. It's all the way down to musicology. You know, I'm something of a musicologist myself. I gotta tell you, when I look back at it, because I was a double major, double minor at Penn. I majored in psychology and English, and I minored in music and French. And so I was a music minor. And I gotta say, oh, this is funny. One sec. Committee on Near Eastern Studies. The Near Eastern Studies Translation Project is the dominant activity. This publication is made possible through a promise by the Arabian American Oil Company to purchase sufficient copies to finance manufacture. A guide to Iranian area studies. So the CIA is getting an oil company to buy up all of the copy. You wonder what all these like CIA liaisons to the oil industry that we covered in the JFK files. We went through that CIA document that had all these different people in the oil industry who had covert CIA security clearances. This is what they're doing. It's like, listen, you could use this. We're trying to get you more oil. But I love this. You know, when I look back on my music minor at Penn, I see it. We had to take these courses on ethnomusicology. You guys know ethnomusicology? Looking back at it, I think the entire field of ethnomusicology is CIA. The entire field. I bet you the entire thing. Do you guys know ethnomusicology? I bet you the whole fucking thing is government funded. Everything we've done on the CIA in music, from jazz diplomacy in the 1940s to classical music conferences to fight Shostakovich during the Cold War, to exporting rock music to the Berlin Wall, and Haute Pour and the Azov Battalion with the heavy metal, to the hip hop. My God, how deep the CIA runs the hip hop game. But you know, in ethnomusicology, I was like studying like weird Mongolian tribes and like sub-Saharan African communities. I'm like, what the fuck? Dude, this is not, I just want to know how to play piano better, man. Like, why are you making me take this? But I get it now. This whole field is about like recruiting assets in all these like distant tribal zones to be able to tilt tribal warfare in the CIA's favor. To be able to run money to them so that they'll fight for us. Or so that when they take over their little autonomous territory, they'll give us, you know, whatever shale or copper or gold or agriculture or whatever. I'm curious, major sources of funding for the field. Let's see. Let's see if we can find who gives, what do you think? Like, if I had to guess, obviously like State Department, USAID, National Endowment for the Humanities, probably. Let's see. Major sources of funding. But it might be a bunch of these like private foundations who all have businesses attached to them, like Carnegie, Rockefeller, Soros. But let's see. Major sources of funding for ethnomusicology. Funding sources. Oh no! Oh no! The Society of Ethnomusicology. Oh no, it's the American Council of Learned Societies. Wait, you mean this one on page 1 of the CIA memo? The American Council of Learned Societies? No! Why? Oh, Fulbright scholars. Oh, great. The CIA incubator program. And the State Department's Bureau of Education and Cultural Affairs. Yep. Yep. And here are all the National Endowment for the Humanities, National Endowment for the Arts, the Rockefeller Foundation. Oh, so the same place that the CIA cheerfully, Rockefeller funding CIA work, Rockefeller funding CIA work, Rockefeller funding CIA work. Oh, 2 more Rockefellers here. Rockefeller funding CIA work. Oh, okay. Great. Oh, the Woodrow Wilson. Make the world safe for democracy. So the second CIA memo on this topic I want to present to you guys is this one, also April 1951. Approved for release also in 1999. Director of Central Intelligence from the Assistant Director on Research. Gotta love that research. And it's titled, Suggestions on Kinds of Projects We Would Like to See the Ford Foundation Support. So, the underdirector at the CIA writes to the head of the CIA, hey, next time you talk to your Ford Foundation guy, tell him to give more money to the below things. The Ford Foundation, which at the time was the largest foundation in the country. The Ford Foundation, I think, was only eclipsed in like the 1980s or 90s. Yeah. For many years, it was the largest private endowment in the world. It remains among the wealthiest. It's got $12 billion of assets today. And of course, just like as we're going to see with the Soros story, all of these, remember, these are the foundations of oligarchs, and there are businesses attached. Okay, like what you'll see here, even with the Ford Foundation, I think they owned at one point like 90%. They owned like a huge amount of the stock of Ford Motor Company. I think they owned like 90% of the stock or some crazy amount. So if Ford wanted to operate a plant in Mexico, the Ford Foundation might be very interested in charitably giving to Amazonian tribes or something. Let's just do some poverty relief programs. We'll work together with the CIA, and then we'll put a big Ford plant. Of course, now they've diversified, as they say. But okay, so the head of research at the CIA writes to the CIA director, suggestions on kinds of projects we would like to see the Ford Foundation support. So remember, the CIA is constrained. Today, it only has a $14 billion budget. That's the same size as the budget of the Ford Foundation today. $14 billion for CIA, $12 billion for Ford. This is why CIA, state, USAID, they're always looking for co-investors in their projects. That's why they owe so many favors to these outside stakeholders. Because I scratch your back, you scratch mine. Privately financed projects can do certain kinds of studies of interest to the government better than government agencies. Some of the things they can probably do better are studies that are long range, will take several years to complete, projects which cut across the interests of two or more agencies, such as, e.g., the political and psychological consequences of economic assistance. Mind you, this is 1951. The Marshall Plan, economic assistance to Europe in order to influence the development of post-war Europe so that it would be more prone to U.S. influence, was key there. And lots of leftist groups in Europe were opposing the Marshall Plan. Lots of CIA activity around trying to implement the Marshall Plan. So studying the psychology and political consequences of it. Projects which provide basic academic training for people subsequently to employed by the government. Now again, by they say government, they mean CIA. This is a CIA. Historical and other basic studies on the nature and structure of foreign countries, which can be done best starting from unclassified materials, which can provide a starting point from which more operational government studies can take off. So they want the universities to gobble up all the unclassified information. And then the CIA can take all of that analysis of the unclassified and then add in the classified component. You want the link? Examples of some of the projects which might satisfy the above criteria. The establishment of area institutes. Area studies. So, Russian studies, Middle East studies, Latin American studies, African studies, East Asian studies. The CIA in 1951 is telling the Ford Foundation, hey, put a shit ton of money into big universities and their area studies programs. This is effectively the other side of this, right? We're reading the CIA side of this now. Like this reference saying, hey, we only have 38, we need 3,800. Let's get them from the universities. And this is the CIA doing that, saying, hey, we need a lot more people at big universities to build out all these fields, and then we can use them for CIA purposes. So here's what it says. The establishment of area institutes, area studies, for both training and research in the political, social, economic, and legal structure of regions of great importance to present U.S. policy, but not as yet extensively studied in universities. This is 1951, declassified in 1999. The prime example is the whole Far Eastern region, of which our knowledge is extremely limited. The Korean War from 1950 to 1953. The launching point of Gavi. Wow, crazy. But, so, that's the Far East. The CIA and the DOD, the newly named DOD, the Department of War, are engaged in massive conflict in the Far East. The Korean War is happening as they speak. And then they're also all over Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia. The prime example is the whole Far Eastern region, of which our knowledge is extremely limited. Now get this. It is impossible to design intelligent programs of economic assistance, political reorientation, or psychological warfare without knowing a great deal more than we now know about the basic characteristics of such crucial districts as Indonesia, Indochina, India, Pakistan, Iraq. The whole point of this is to get the CIA, the Director of Central Intelligence, to convince private foundations to give more money to big universities so that the CIA can use that information for, I'm sorry, can I zoom any more? Psychological warfare. In 1951, at the birth of these fields, that today everyone and their mother has to go through on their way through universities, the end purpose of studying all these different area studies programs, African studies, Middle Eastern studies, Far Eastern studies, Latin American studies, is so the friggin' CIA can use that shit for psychological warfare. I love the first one. The first one he mentions is Indonesia. Barack Obama's mother worked in Indonesia at USAID and was also employed by the Ford Foundation in Indonesia. And here is the CIA saying we need to run funny. We need the Ford Foundation to run money to the exact cultural anthropology work that Barack Obama's mother was doing at that time in Indonesia while she was working at both USAID and the Ford Foundation. Huh. Ah. That's a shame John Brennan hacked into the passport office of the State Department and deleted all the records. Kind of weird he was promoted to Director of Central Intelligence by Barack Obama after Brennan deleted his passport information. That's just really weird. Okay. The combination of programs of intensive research by groups representing the social science disciplines could be enormously useful to the intelligence agencies of the government. Why is it that social science is funded? You know, your tuitions, you're paying like $90K a year now for like tuitions at the big universities. What is the tuition at Harvard? $57,000? $65,000 a year at Harvard? A year. Your tuition isn't funding that research. The $9 billion from the government is. And then the top-up billions from the private foundations who the government is leaning on, because those foundations are attached to hedge funds or big multinational corporations that the government does favors for if they're good to them. They're saying the entire field of social science is useful to the intelligence agencies of the government. And we saw that. Look at the breadth. Again, go back to this other CIA memo here. Look at the breadth of these social studies programs the CIA wants funded. Program of Research in Law and Behavioral Sciences. Advanced Study in Behavioral Sciences. Organizational Behavior. Application of Mathematical Models to Behavioral Sciences. These are all CIA subjects that they want universities, all these universities doing. Inventory of knowledge on political behavior, inventory of knowledge on social stratification, study of intergroup relations and hostility, methodological research in human relations, parapsychology, social physics, social psychology, the uses of power, international communications, the flow of foreign news, knowledge on communications, influence of group orientation on receptivity to communicated values, attitude change, Russian language, Chinese philosophy, Turkish-speaking Muslims of the Soviet world. Gee, who do you think the CIA is working with? If you see a CIA university program that the CIA wants the Ford Foundation to fund called Turkish-speaking Muslims of the Soviet world, they're probably interested in the Turkish-speaking Muslims of the Soviet world. All of these the whole field of social science. And that's what caused it to explode. You can read Total Cold War, which is a whole book about this, by the way, I recommend it for. A general evaluation, area by area, of the extent to which economic assistance has had or could have an important effect in promoting adherence to the ideals of political democracy. Economic assistance. Today that's USAID. At the time it was the Marshall Fund. USAID was created a decade after that to be a global Marshall Fund. Marshall Fund was started in what, like 1948, was it, around then? Marshall Fund? Because it's part of the Truman Doctrine, right? 1948. Man, I'm good. 13.3 billion. When did it like phase out? Was it 48 to 51? Is that what it was? Oh. Huh. The Marshall Plan was replaced. So the Marshall Plan started in 1948. It was replaced by the Mutual Security Plan at the end of 1951, the date of the CIA memo, which then gave away $7.5 billion annually until 1961, when it was replaced by another program. Hey, another program. Hey, when was USAID founded again? 1961. Come on, man. Literally, USAID was created as soon as the Marshall Plan. Like the year the Marshall Plan went away, USAID was created as a global Marshall Plan. While the CIA is studying, hey, how much does economic bribery get us? What is the ROI on a global bribery fund? We should quantify the benefit. Let's have the foundations fund the universities. Or will USAID fund the universities? Or the NIH? Or the Department of Education? Or the National Endowment for the Arts, or National Endowment for Humanities? Historical studies indicating how foreign areas have reached their present stage of development, with any lessons that can be derived as to the limits of their historical experience, placed on what we can hope to do with them economically and politically in the future. You mean that? This is the CIA saying, we need to build up big university as a bigger, better, badder CIA asset. The CIA wants funding for the area studies, Russian studies, Middle Eastern studies, African studies, Latin American studies, for the social science programs, psychology, communications, sociology, for the history classes, for the economics classes. Every friggin' department at the universities. They're not teaching the kids, okay? That's not how they make their bread. You're funded by the government, and you're giving the information. The grants are not, like, the $9 billion to Harvard is not given so that, like, students can learn better. It's given because the U.S. government wants intelligence work done, and it doesn't get enough in its own budget to do that. But they get a lot from all the other departments, and that can be useful to the CIA. And this is how you have CIA up and down every major university. From Michael Crow, the head of CIA's InQtel, running Arizona State University, to Penny Pritzker, running Harvard, to the entire Columbia University architecture we just saw, to the University of Pennsylvania, Amy Gutman, my dean there, 20 years ago, only leaves after 20 years, longest serving president in UPenn history, leaves to become the U.S. State Department ambassador to Germany, and then we blow up Germany's Nord Stream pipeline. Meanwhile, the University of Pennsylvania is hosting the Penn Biden Center for Diplomacy and Global Engagement, whose managing director was Tony Blinken, who had been tapped to become the Secretary of State when he left the Penn Biden Center. Tom Donilon, who was the first pick to be CIA director by Joe Biden. turned it down to keep running the BlackRock Institute, who was the national security advisor in charge of intelligence, statecraft, and military, and who won the CIA's Director Award, is at the Columbia World Fellows Program now. While he's at BlackRock. History. The study of history so that it can help the CIA take advantage of those countries economically and politically. 1951, way back at the start. Way before Harvard was the Harvard we know today, and Columbia was the Columbia we know today, and the MIT was the MIT we know today. But it's all the way down to the littler ones, as we saw here. Cornell, Chicago, Stanford, Princeton, Carnegie Tech, Yale, Harvard, University of Minnesota, MIT, Rutgers. Nowhere is safe. Speaking of which, I have a couple more on this topic. And then we are going to get to the main event. I promo. Let's do this one. How about a little music? This is a real university where you learn the good shit. Okay, this is the one. Unredacted. This one's crazy. This one's fucking crazy. Here it is. Just declassified 2.5 months ago. CIA memorandum. You guys read this? Estimate of damage which could accrue to CIA Miami through prosecution of the Rolando Masfer Haitian Invasion Group. You guys seeing this? You guys seeing this shit? So I want you guys to just, we are in 1967, I believe. Let's see. Orlando Masfer. So this is the guy, our homie, poor fellow, was killed in a car bomb in 1957. Miami, Havana. So start off in Cuba, was brought over by the CIA and DOD like the other Cubans. Right here in sunny, beautiful Miami, the site of the largest CIA station in the universe. That CIA station was called JM Wave. You can extra read all about it. This was the largest CIA station in the world. And it was the Task Force Center for Operation Mongoose, which was the Operation Mongoose was when all of our previous attempts to overthrow the Cuban government had failed, and we regionalized the conflict to extend it to all of Latin America. And at the time, all of Latin America was aflame in the eyes of the State Department and CIA because of the rise of Marxist liberation theology. A lot of the Latin American countries, which had been under U.S. political vassalage since the Banana Wars, had begun tilting communist in the eyes of the State Department and CIA. And so we regionalized the conflict under Operation Mongoose, ran out of Miami because Miami was the major port city that was the gateway to the entire Caribbean, especially Cuba, 90 miles off the coast of Cuba. But then also Colombia, Nicaragua, Guatemala. There's basically like 3 major port cities that did all this work during the Cold War. And those were Miami, Tampa, and New Orleans. That was how shit was smuggled. That's how arms were smuggled. That's how goods were smuggled. Miami was really the center of it because it was the closest to the Caribbean and was flexible with all of Latin America. It's also the first port you hit, if you're coming from Africa, even parts of Southern Europe. There's just a ton of flow through with Miami. So Miami was home base, #1 for the CIA. The entire economy of Miami, the entire population demographics of Miami, all of it is because of the CIA and DOD's work throughout the Cold War. That is what built the city of Miami. So it grew to be the largest CIA station in the world, right here, my home. Brought over 15,000 anti-Castro Cubans, all on CIA payroll. From this one station, 15,000 Miami citizens, Cuban exiles, on CIA payroll. 15,000. Our Secretary of State is a Cuban refugee, Marco Rubio. One of these 15,000 was a poor fella named Rolando Masfer. This is too cheap to do a Wikipedia. This is a funny story. Born in Cuba, became a successful newspaper publisher. Oh, they love those newspaper publishers. Strong supporter of Batista, helped organize a private army. They love guys who can help organize a private army. That's why the CIA works so closely with unions, because unions are effectively a private army. If union leadership can marshal people appropriately. Fled to the United States with $10 million. He established an anti-Castro organization called the 30th of November. Had links with Alpha 66, which is a hyper-militant Cuban exile CIA group. Attempted to assassinate Castro, remained in contact with Santo Traficante. That's who ran the Tampa ports. Santo Traficante was the big mobster who ran Tampa. He and Meyer Lansky were the two big CIA Department of War assets throughout the Cold War in Miami, Tampa, and New Orleans. And Jimmy Hoffa, the unions. I didn't even see that before I said it. I said they love working with these guys because they organize private armies or just unions. And lo and behold, he's working with the head of the Teamsters Union, who provided funds for his activities. Wow. Look, I mean, Trump winning over the unions in 2024 is like one of his biggest achievements, when he got the Teamsters to not declare for the Democrats for the first time in Teamster history. One of the reasons there's probably no protests, because the unions sat out. Hoffa gave Masser $50,000 in expense money to set up an assassination team. Killed in a car bomb. But what's really interesting is Rolando Masfer was a loose cannon. Lottie presents as, wait a minute, Lansky was CIA. I don't know if Lansky had like a covert clearance working with the CIA. I highly doubt that. But if you read Supermob or Operation Gladio, you'll see, I mean, it's completely inseparable, Lansky and the CIA work. Lansky was the organized crime side of the CIA during the Cold War. Lansky wanted to take back Havana because Lansky had all sorts of investments in Havana, in Cuba. It was the gambling center. It was the hotel center. He had a ton of real estate. And Lansky had all these back-channel conversations with the Department of War. Because, again, they controlled the docks. They controlled the union workers. They controlled the transport, which the CIA relied on, the DOD relied on. They want goods smuggled. They want weapons smuggled. They want drugs smuggled so that the drugs can be converted to cash to buy guns or supplies. That all runs through organized crime. And that's what keeps the Justice Department off your back. As we will see in the title of this memo, estimate of damage which could accrue to CIA Miami through Justice Department prosecution of Rolando Masfer Haitian invasion. Okay, so understand. Here's what happened. Rolando Masfer was a good boy up until the day that he wasn't. Rolando Masfer was brought over by the CIA. He was on payroll, part of a group of 15,000 who were, but he was a little too hot for JFK. All of the anti-Castro Cubans wanted to kill Castro, wanted to take Cuba back, but Rolando Masfer was super aggressive about it, beyond what JFK was comfortable with. Just like JFK was not comfortable with the Bay of Pigs invasion and a lot of these other heavy-handed attempts, Rolando Masfer decided that he would go in against the direction of the CIA and against the direction of JFK, who tried to cut links with Alpha 66 and these other super terrorist groups. Decided, fuck it, JFK is moving too slowly. I am going to lead a group of private mercenaries to invade Haiti myself and then use Haiti as a launch pad to attack Cuba. So this ended up being a big disaster. By the way, just like Silverline, the private mercenary firm attempted to invade Venezuela during Trump's term in 2019, if you remember that. Here's from Vice. MAGA, the CIA, and Silvercorp. The bizarre backstory of the world's most disastrous coup. You guys want to check this out? This stuff still happens today. This is what we use private mercenary firms like Blackwater and their ilk, as well as we tried the Silvercorp, private mercenaries that think they can take on another country's army, and sometimes successfully. United Fruit did this, for example, successfully. It was like 1910-ish. Honduras, I think it was Honduras, yeah. 1911, there it is. In 1911, this is what Sam Zamuri's Banana Company did. Got in a fight with Secretary of State. Lee Christmas was the equivalent of Rolando Masfer in this case, who organized a private militia to go in and overthrow the Honduran government in a military coup. Sam Zamuri would go on to run United Fruit later, but there were two banana companies at war with each other for a long time. Emmanuel Bonilla was the big guy they used for that. They worked, of course, through the New Orleans gangster mob for the paramilitaries. Same thing. So, and you can read all about that if you want. But this still happens today. Like I said, in 2019, we tried this in Venezuela. It happens all the time. But the State Department didn't want to do it. The CIA didn't want to do it. JFK didn't want to do it. So when a CIA-backed group unilaterally decided to invade Haiti, the Justice Department cracked down, and they indicted Rolando Masfer. Here's from CIA.gov here. Here you go. Director of Central Intelligence, 1967, subject Rolando Masfer trial. During the past year, we have spent a good deal of time working with the Department of Justice and the U.S. Attorney in Miami on possible problems in connection with the trial of Rolando Masfer, which begins on November 6, 1967. Now, juxtapose this with this JFK memo. This is February 24th, 1967. This one is 5 months later. The decision by the Justice Department to seek a grand jury indictment against Rolando Masfer and certain of his associates is a potentially explosive matter, which could result in extensive damage to CIA activities in Miami. So this drug dealer and private mercenary on CIA payroll goes and is a hothead and tries to invade Haiti on his own with a group of a couple hundred of his thug friends, fails, and the Justice Department indicts him for unilateral diplomacy against the U.S. government. And the CIA steps in and says, wait, Justice Department, back off. He belongs to intelligence. Does that sound familiar? Any bells ringing? If you remember, Alex Acosta, who was in charge of the first Epstein trial before Epstein himself, or whatever the FBI says now, was told Jeffrey Epstein belonged to intelligence and to back off, leave him alone. I was told Epstein belonged to intelligence and to leave it alone. Let me know if any of the details here sound familiar, okay? He'd cut the non-prosecution deal with one of Epstein's attorneys because he had been told to back off. Epstein was above his pay grade. I was told Epstein belonged to intelligence and to leave it alone, he told his interviewers in the Trump transition. Of course, the Department of Labor is unions, same organized crime networks. Now, remember, Alex Acosta, who was also the dean of Florida International University, the CIA recruiting center in the university world, where Juan Guaido is, we've covered this. Juan Guaido, the CIA's man in Venezuela, is now at FIU, where Alex Acosta was the dean. So he was the former U.S. attorney in Miami, prosecuting Epstein. So back here, in February 1967, the CIA is trying to estimate the damage to CIA by prosecuting their man. An indictment against Rolando Masfer and certain of his associates is a potentially explosive matter, which could result in extensive damage to CIA activities in Miami. And then 5 months later, during the past year, we have spent a good deal of time working with the Department of Justice and the U.S. Attorney in Miami on possible problems in connection with the trial of our asset, Rolando Masfer. It's the same thing. It's the same friggin' jurisdiction. Continuing. Recent adverse publicity on the national scene and in the Miami area have added substantially to the already sizable embarrassment potential to the Central Intelligence Agency if the Justice Department doesn't back off. Some of the main sectors of danger to CIA equities are described below. Basic national publicity regarding student and foundation topics have already attracted attention of the local press to the CIA in general. Usually, any reference to CIA covert activities lends the press to check files for references to any such activities locally. However, before this action could be taken, the story regarding the Pan American Foundation and the University of Miami broke, and the press immediately concentrated on this topic. The CIA chief of station learned through personal press contacts that this was partly a matter of luck and partly because of the friendly and cooperative attitude of these press contacts. So the press covered up what the CIA was afraid was going to be a giant scandal if people found out about the Pan American Foundation and the University of Miami that hosted JM Wave. The CIA was all over it. Fortunately, they knew the people in the press. Personal contacts in the press. Although several editorials highly critical of CIA have been published, and the replay of wire service stories have given much space, as yet there has been no local follow-up aimed at putting CIA or the CIA station on the spot. We're good so far. We thought we were in the clear. However, the situation remains delicate, since even with much goodwill, local newsmen cannot afford to let themselves be scooped concerning stories in their own backyard. Much goodwill from the press to the CIA to not print their secrets. But they don't want to be scooped. We're not sure we can control the press forever. Can you see why the CIA hates social media freedom? Because you can't know every single influencer, every single person with the phone. Every single person with an iPhone can't be a personal contact of the head of the Miami station or the Arkansas or the Ohio or wherever a scandal pops up. There's only a handful of newspapers. So they're saying we've been free of scandal for the most part, but this guy, this Justice Department investigation could break the whole thing open because he's been everywhere. And if the Justice Department prosecutes this guy and lets these secrets out, we're fucked. Any news story, such as the 22nd of February story in the World Journal Tribune on suspected CIA connections with recruitment of Cuban pilots for the Congo, the possible results of inquiries made on February 21st by 3 students connected with the University of Miami newspaper, The Hurricane, or further revelations concerning the Pan American Foundation could easily trigger publicity with an inevitable focus on the South Campus of the University of Miami and the Miami Station cover firm. As has been the case for the past 6 years, Dr. Henry King Stanford, president, and Dr. Eugene Arthur, vice president and treasurer of the University of Miami, have extended their fullest cooperation concerning CIA Miami Station and overall CIA interests, and is anticipated they will continue to do so. So the Miami CIA station has a very, very, very close relationship with the president of the University of Miami, as well as its vice president and treasurer. And both the president and vice president and treasurer have been good so far, the CIA says. They've been very good for overall CIA interests. However, we believe there is a practical limit to the amount of pressure they can stand from their trustees and from certain public quarters if there is a flood of publicity regarding CIA activities centered in or controlled from the Zenith Technical Enterprises, Inc., that's the CIA Miami cover firm, or its accused successor, the Hellmark Corporation. If such a situation arises, it is conceivable that the president of the University of Miami would feel compelled to take some action aimed at dissociating the University of Miami from any contact with the Hellmark Corporation, our CIA cover firm. Since the Hellmark Corporation, the CIA cover firm, is ostensibly the tenant of the University of Miami, although on federal property, the resulting action might involve a request for the termination of the tenancy agreement. Even if the above circumstances did not exist, we would remain concerned regarding the possible effects of the prosecution of the Masfer group, the group of people who invaded Haiti. Although no station agents or persons with whom the Miami station has contractual arrangements were among the persons arrested or those who will be prosecuted, it will be very easy for the defense to drag CIA Miami into the case. What do you think happened here? Judge issues gag order, silencing lawyers in defendants over Haiti assassination. Now, what happened was, in this case, a former FBI informant, a former DEA agent, and several people trained by the U.S. military went in and assassinated the president of Haiti in 2021. Then the Justice Department shut down the case, did not allow anyone to attend the trial, said that they would bar defense attorneys from receiving classified information, even though it was critical to the case of the defendants, and then put all of the lawyers, all 11 defense lawyers, under gag orders. Do ya think it's because of the same fucking thing? It would be very easy for the defense to drag CIA Miami into the case. So the CIA works with the Justice Department, and they get them to back off of that side of the case. Request the judge put blanket sensitivity, because if the lawyers are given this information, or the lawyers are allowed to enter into evidence, now the public will know what their own intelligence agencies have been doing with their own money, and how deeply they've penetrated the entire jurisdiction, the entire area surrounding the courthouse, including the universities, the labor groups, the corporations. The defense has only to obtain testimony from one of the defendants or summon as defense witnesses one or more disaffected former agents of the CIA station in order to begin a chain reaction surfacing much detail concerning CIA operations against the Cuban target. A general feeling of frustration and lack of support attributed to passive U.S. policy and CIA support in all sectors, the long-standing animosity of certain exile circles. The evaluation is that the CIA is now the most vulnerable of federal agencies, and exiles will be confronted to see it an attack against CIA as accomplishing several purposes: gaining acquittal, blockading CIA, and exerting pressure on the U.S. government for a policy change. Justice Department, you've got to shape this case very closely to not let our secrets out. And now here's the update 5 months later. Again, that's run through the universities you saw there. Every major university, University of Miami, University of Minnesota, Rutgers, Harvard, Yale, UPenn, MIT, Princeton, name me a university who gets to be a big university, who doesn't have this. So here's the update 5 months later. CIA, memo for the head of the Central Intelligence Agency. And so far this has escalated. We spent a good deal of time, we the CIA, working with the Justice Department and the lead prosecutor in Miami on problems in connection with the Rolando Masfer trial. He's arrested by the Bureau of Customs for violating the Neutrality Act when he and a number of other Cubans and some Haitians were about to embark on an expedition against Haiti. An indictment was obtained shortly thereafter, and certain members of his band. Neither we nor Justice was informed of the arrest ahead of time. because we would have stopped it. But damn it, Customs and Border Patrol got him. And damn it. So we had to do something because they were arrested by Customs and Border Patrol. But we raised a question with the Department of State and Justice as to whether there should be an indictment. State's strong desire for prosecution of this particular group prevailed over our worries. I want you to just read this. Justice is blind, right? No. Whether or not someone is prosecuted is not about whether or not they committed a crime. It's about whether the State Department or the Central Intelligence Agency wins. Do you see that? This guy committed a crime. Violation of the Neutrality Act, unilaterally invading a foreign country from the U.S. The CIA wants to let him go. The State Department wants to make an example out of him so that other Cubans don't do this. Because the CIA was pissed that the State Department was not backing more aggressive tactics against Cuba. It was a big part of the conflict during the JFK administration. We raised a question with State and Justice about whether there should even be an indictment. The CIA is saying, don't prosecute him, don't prosecute him. The State Department is saying, prosecute him. Make an example so other Cubans don't do this. And the CIA says, but wait. He's a part of a huge fucking CIA network. It's going to really embarrass us when all the shit that he's involved in gets out. We're super vulnerable. There could be potentially explosive, a chain reaction of revelations. Any of this come to mind when you think Jeffrey Epstein? The State Department probably wanted him arrested. The CIA probably said, don't do it. Alex Costa was probably caught in a tug of war between all of that. A chain reaction of explosive revelations. In Miami, where Epstein was prosecuted. Just 30 years before it. State's strong desire for prosecution prevailed. And yet the CIA continued to work with the Justice Department in Miami so that the State Department got what they wanted, the prosecution, but the Justice Department blocked things about the case. We see several areas of possible trouble for us. From the start, Masfer has indicated he would claim that the CIA knew about and endorsed the expedition. Ha! The problem is, if you let Masfer testify, he's going to claim that we knew and we endorsed it. In fact, practically everyone in Florida, including CIA, knew about the expedition, but our station made every effort to keep away from it. Oh, did you though? What if he's got evidence to present that you did endorse it? Maybe he recorded a phone call with one of your agents, and your agent said, yeah, do it. Well, Justice Department, you can't let that into evidence. You got to block that line of inquiry. You got to get the judge to say, that's not relevant. You got to block that defense. Our association at the CIA started in the late 1940s, but was cut off completely in the 1950s. Oh yeah, was it? Certain members of the expedition, however, had more recent contacts with the agency. Oh, so you mean you could have back-channeled it by telling other people a part of the expedition, you support it. Go, go, go. The second area of concern arises from the fact that certain individuals associated directly or indirectly with Masfer have also cropped up in the Garrison investigation in New Orleans. We cannot predict any specific problems here, except information developed in Miami may well be grist to Garrison's mill. Another point involves one David Cabeza, who has done fairly extensive work for us at the CIA and may be called as a witness. he would probably be willing to talk about his activities for us if such testimony were admissible in evidence. Hopefully, the government lawyers can prevent this. This is the Central Intelligence Agency dictating the Justice Department to block a witness from being able to defend someone on criminal trial because it might embarrass or cause political blowback for the Central Intelligence Agency. Your right to defend yourself from spending the rest of your life in prison, if that involves calling a witness to disclose information about covert action, well, sorry. Even if the jury would be persuaded by that information and would think you should be a free man, you're not allowed that line of defense. Justice is not blind. It rolls up the blindfold and checks with the Central Intelligence Agency. The defense has stated it will cause a witness, Cesario Diosado. He's a Bureau of Customs official who became so involved in working with us that for the past few years, we have been reimbursing Customs for his salary, and he has actually been under our direction. He participated in the arrest of Masfer. It's possible his relationship with us will come out during the trial. Hopefully, the government lawyers can prevent that. All of these points have been discussed in detail with the Department of Justice in the hope that it might drop the indictment. It is still under pressure from 2 points, however. The Department of State very much wants to get a conviction, particularly after the failure of the B-26 case in Buffalo. Obviously, the Masfer case looks like an ideal one to prosecute from this point of view. Secondly, CBS worked with Masfer's group and apparently filmed all the preparations. CBS was doing a friggin' real-time documentary about the attempt to overthrow the government of Haiti. It has been cooperating with justice and supplied its film to the U.S. attorney. So this apparently provides convincing information of a gross violation of the Neutrality Act. Justice feels there is no logical explanation it can be given for dropping the indictment. As our worries are purely speculative and we cannot predict with certainty that we will be involved, I do not believe we have sufficient ammunition to contest the DOJ's position. Justice has spent a great deal of time studying our problems and certainly will make every effort to control the situation insofar as we, the CIA, are concerned. So they are still lobbying the Justice Department to back off because he belongs to intelligence. And this could trigger a chain reaction of revelations about everything else the CIA is involved in. Does this sound familiar? Now, the Justice Department, State Department won. They are going to prosecute, but they are going to try to use their government lawyers to prevent every aspect of CIA involvement in Jeffrey Epstein. Rolando Masfer. One of my lawyers, Mr. John Greaney, will be in Miami working with the U.S. and his attorney throughout the trial. Isn't that amazing?